Luke 24, verses 1 to 12, the resurrection of Jesus. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home amazed at what had happened.
I had thought that I might begin tonight by pointing out that in the late 2nd century, Tertullian, the early church father, said that the conditions, reasons, and law of the Christian faith inherently forbid followers of Christ from enjoying the spectacle of the theatre. And here we are. So I thought that if I made this boring and you didn't enjoy it, we'll be okay. Yeah. Last November, as part of my role at Acadia Divinity College, I had the opportunity to attend the Lester Randall Preaching Conference in Toronto. One of the main speakers that night was Terry LeBlanc, who opened for us this evening. Thank you, Terry. One of the other main speakers was Susan Sparks. Susan Sparks is a Baptist minister and stand-up comedian. Now, some of you are going, "Oh my," and some of you are going, "Oh, if only." Whatever. On that occasion, she preached a sermon, and she preached a sermon from some words in the Bible that have been hanging around in my mind ever since. They've been hanging around in my mind like one of these helium-filled party balloons that escapes your grasp, floats up into a high corner of the room, never absent, but somehow always out of reach. And you can't really do much about it until you wait till the thing floats back down again. Well, as I've been thinking about tonight, those words began to float back down again. And the words that floated back down have been hanging around in my mind now for almost a year were the words found, the first reading, which I saw Peter made very clear that I chose it, the first reading from the book of Jeremiah, and the words were these words: "So, if you're worn out in this foot race with people, what makes you think you can race against the horses?" Thinking about these words and thinking about tonight, I did several things. One thing I did was I watched the Steven Spielberg film War Horse. It's a film that focuses upon, when you hear that word film, I'm saying movie. I'm not going to be able to translate it all night for you, so you'll have to keep up with me, okay? So in that movie, it focuses upon the role of horses in World War I. And the reason that I watched the film was because the background to these words is indeed the background of warfare and of conflict. The contrast that has been drawn is between the strength and power of a horse and the strength and power of a soldier on foot. In the Spielberg movie, there is a moment, somewhat sentimental. Two soldiers, Colin and Peter, they rescue the horse from somewhere in the middle of the battlefield. It's caught up in razor wire. They marvel at its strength and its power. They begin to have a conversation. They talk about it. They call it our strange beast. They say it was made for running. Look at it. But they say, normally it would run away from trouble, but we have trained it to run towards trouble, and therefore they named it the war horse. And I was really surprised to find in the Old Testament there's a poetic description of such a strange beast. We find it near the end of the book of Job. It appears in some Hebrew poetry. I'm going to paraphrase it like this: rippled, muscled power, thick, majestic mane. It rears in its hind legs, agile like a locust. It breathes heavily. It paws the ground. It paws the ground fiercely. It senses the battle from afar. It hears the sound. It whinnies in anticipation. Every fiber of its body tenses as it waits for the command. When the trumpet sounds, it unleashes its coiled up power. It springs forth. It celebrates its strength. It eats up the ground in front of it. It laughs in the face of danger. It will not be turned back by the sword, nor will it give up when the arrows fly and the spears and the javelins flash. With such an image, you can maybe understand why in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, the war horse is a symbol of might and power and strength. Our words, if you can't compete with the foot soldiers, how are you going to race with the horses? But I did something else to prepare, apart from watching a movie. Take notes, students in the class. I also read the novel. I had planned to watch the movie, but I read the novel. Canadian novel, Indian Horse. And of course, it's not about horses at all, really, but about a man, a boy, come man, who suffers all of the horrendous and terrible abuses of that which has been named the Canadian Indian residential school system and subsequent racism for no other reason than he belonged to the people who first lived in this land. And at one part in the book, Indian Horse says this: when your innocence is stripped from you, when your people are denigrated, when the family you came from is denounced, and your tribal ways and rituals are pronounced backward, primitive, savage, you come to see yourself as less than a human. That is hell on earth. And that is what they inflicted on us. In the story, however, there is redemption. For in the story, Indian Horse finds, in the spirituality of his tradition and in his community, the power and the strength to rise beyond what he suffered, not actually by becoming a great hockey player in Canada's game, but rather by reclaiming something of his stolen identity and humanity. In Indian Horse, the horse serves as a metaphor for the power somehow of the human spirit in community connected to a greater spirit. So too in the book of Jeremiah, when it talks about the horse and foot soldiers, it's metaphors. It's a metaphor of the human spirit connected to God's spirit and the possibility or non-possibility of what can be done in the situations and the conflicts that we face. I read another book in preparation. This isn't easy. I read the book called Run with the Horses. The book Run with the Horses is written by Eugene Peterson. It's a book rather that focuses upon the life of Jeremiah. It's something of a devotional study for people to read. Peterson is well known as a Christian writer. Someone said to Peterson, however, that this book was a bit more underrated than the rest of them. And he replied as follows. Well, said Peterson, Bono says it's his favourite book of all time. Yes, that is Bono from U2. Now, whether he said it was the favourite book of all time, I do not know. But what I do know is that Bono said that this book helped him to understand that Jeremiah was a performing artist. I like that. For someone else indeed has written, the Hebrew prophets were performers, not authors. They were more akin to poetry slammers, rappers, performance artists, folk singers, holiness preachers, merry pranksters, and street performers. So I read the book because I wanted to be introduced to this prophet who somehow was a public street performer. Oh, and I did one more thing. And there will be some relief here in the front from the biblical scholars. I looked at some biblical commentaries. Again, for the students, we have these over in the library, and you can get them anytime. I looked at maybe 9 of them, maybe 13, and I learned some stuff. I learned, for example, that these words that were read to us come from part of the book of Jeremiah, which is known as the Confessions, his Confessions. As to genre or style, they are lament, or better, you heard it, a complaint. Jeremiah is not happy. Jeremiah complains to God. This is a completely valid form of worship. But Jeremiah is making his cause known. Why is he suffering when he's good? And all the people he's been asked by God to speak against, although wicked, are getting on well. It's the old question. Why do bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? He's not happy about this. And the words that I was interested in, the commentators told me, are God's response. And what the commentators say God said to Jeremiah was, get over yourself and get on with it. For if you think just now that it's been tough, how are you going to cope when things get tougher? And they are going to get tougher. Well, sometimes you get committed to a passage and you're stuck, right? Well, I think maybe there are times in our life, sometimes in our life, when quite simply, as we live our lives in our vocation, call it that if you want, your job, call it that. Sometimes your vocation just feels like a job. There are some times in our lives when we do indeed need people to say to us, get over yourself and get on with it. It is a job. Simply do the job. And that can be spoken to us, as here in Jeremiah, from people who believe in us, who are concerned about us, and who love us. And that might be no bad thing. In my last job, I used to share an office with a colleague, and when I was moaning and whining and complaining, he would look up from the computer. He was Irish. He would peer over the top of it, and he would say to me, dry your eyes, big lad. Get over yourself and get on with it. And sometimes these are good words, not very inspirational. And when Anna saw the reading for tonight, she said, it is a little bit harsh. And there's something in my personality that should like the harsh, to be honest. Because I'm one of these, my glass is always half empty kind of guys. Some people call that being negative. Some people call that being pessimistic. I call it being Scottish. Because I was brought up in a country where if a child was crying, the response of the parent would be, stop that, or I will give you something to cry about. Parenting, Jeremiah style. The book might not sell. But here's the strange thing. When these words came floating down, and as I got a hold of them, Anna, it was the flip side of them that caught my attention. For if it is the case that if you've been wearied when you've engaged with the foot soldiers, you can't run with the horses, maybe the opposite is true. Maybe the opposite is true, and that if we have indeed contended with the foot soldiers and not been overcome, we're ready to run with the horses. And these were the words I saw as it kind of landed finally, and I got a hold of it. This is what it said: it's time to run with the horses. Anna, it's time to run with the horses. We as staff and faculty at Acadia Divinity College need you now to take on your new roles and responsibilities with all of the courage, determination, brilliance, and creativity by which you have taken on every other responsibility. We need you to do that, because in that way you will make us the best that we can be. And we want to be the best that we can be. We want to be the best that we can be for our students, absolutely. For the reputation of Acadia Divinity College, undoubtedly. For the good name of this university, certainly. For the development of the mission and ministry of the Canadian Baptists of Atlantic Canada, without question. But ultimately, for the glory of God, it's time to run with the horses. It's time to run with the horses, because we need to continue to develop forms of theological education which do not simply report what has happened in the past or even train what is required for today, but rather forms of theological education that will equip people to work out in the future what it means to be faithful followers of Jesus Christ, where they will need to think tough, feel deep, act courageously. That's the kind of theological education we need to develop. It's time to run with the horses. We need to run with the horses. For in a day and an age where it seems increasingly acceptable by often religious-supported populism to denigrate and dehumanize others, we need to train people and form people who will not simply offer pastoral care, but who will be prepared to be prophetic performers in the public stage and in the face of injustice to say, not in God's name. It's time to run with the horses. It's time to run with the horses, because indeed, the poor need to hear the good news. The blind need their sight. Prisoners need freedom. The oppressed need liberty, and all people need to hear the proclamation of the goodness and the glory of God. It's time to run with the horses, because he who is in the world has overcome it. He who was crucified has been raised. He who was raised has been ascended. He who ascended has sent his Spirit. And today in the church, we name Jesus as Lord. It's time to run with the horses. Anna has got quite a wicked sense of humor. You may not know this, and she doesn't like some old-fashioned things. I'm not going to give away any secrets. This is public. And there are certain words she really doesn't like. She doesn't like the word luncheon. Okay? Who has a luncheon other than in church? Okay? Well, when Anna sent me the draft order of service for tonight, my bit was down as the charge. And I thought, what on earth has that to do with anything? I remember in childhood playing in the street, one child would shout charge, and the rest would shout. In Scotland, what happens is one child shouts charge, and the rest shout. Absolutely. But still I thought, what on earth has it got to do with anything? We discussed this description of what I had to do. Some people wanted to call it a sermon. Some people wanted to make it shorter, and so they called it a homily. No luck. But in the end, we left it as a charge. Because as I reflected upon these words from Jeremiah, and as I remembered the actual title of Susan Sparks' sermon, which was, Let the Races Begin, it seems to me, Anna, that we come here tonight to install you as the 7th President of Acadia Divinity College, Dr. Robbins, we come to install you because you deserve to be here. We come to install you because you have contended with the foot soldiers. Some translations say footmen, and indeed them as well. And you have not been overcome. And now it's time to run with the horses. And we gather here tonight, and together we want to say to you, charge, and we will run with you.